and look at the question of imagination in relationship to artificial intelligence. I turn it over to Brian Fung, who is the technology editor for the Washington Post.
Thanks so much for that great introduction. We spent much of our last panel talking a lot about what's possible and how to think about what's possible. We're going to now try and make things a little bit more concrete by talking about what's actually happening today in actual society and trying to extrapolate where things might go from there. So joining me today we have Vint Cerf, who is Google's chief internet evangelist and who's also known as one of the fathers of the internet, something that we use and has changed our lives every day. Beside him is Dr. Ian Wickersham, who is at MIT. He's the principal investigator for the Genetic Neuroengineering Group and the director of the Wickersham Lab. Oops, I'm sorry. And finally, we have David Newman, who is the former deputy administrator of NASA and is the Apollo Program professor of Aeronautics and Astronautics and Engineering. Well, that's quite a lengthy title, systems at MIT. So I just thought I'd start off with a general question kind of about what is actually happening in artificial intelligence in your field today. If you could give us sort of an update on how things are going and what changes are taking place and how that might affect the average human experience.
So where do you want to start?
Let's start with you, Vint.
Okay, so first of all, at Google, we've invested a considerable amount in what used to be called artificial intelligence. I think now we're more comfortable saying it's largely machine learning. We think that a significant breakthrough came when the neural networks that could be built were much, much deeper, hundreds of layers deep compared to one or two. So back in the 60s, you might have a simple little one-layer neural network, and they couldn't do very much. In fact, Minsky and Papert wrote a book called Perceptrons, which demonstrated the weaknesses and limitations of the sort of one-layer deep system. But when you get 100 or 500 or 1,000 layers worth of neural network, and you have great flexibility for interconnections between these things, the training that you do, where you, for example, the classical thing is, can you tell the difference between an image of a dog and a cat? And you train the system by showing it images of dogs and cats, and it goes through a series of weighted values based on the pixels that are coming in at the top, and at the bottom it says, is it a dog or a cat? And if you say, no, it's a dog and not a cat, it back propagates the error, and so that you try to reduce the mistake. What's interesting, and this is my lay interpretation of what's going on, is that the deeper that network is, the more state it can capture from its experiences. Now, I'm making this up. I don't want you to necessarily believe that, but it's my little cartoon model of trying to understand why is it that a very, very deep neural network can do more. So our deep networks have learned how to play Go, for example, and they beat the national or international champions, in one case 4 games out of 5, in another case all games. So we also have self-driving cars. Now this is not just a neural network. This is a complex collection of methods to take information in from the outside world and to process it in such a way that in real time the car can navigate, can avoid running into things, can figure out when it's supposed to start and stop, notice that there are street signals and things like that. So there's a funny combination of machine learning going on and basically rule-based stuff, like if there is a stoplight and it's red, you should stop. This is not something you train it to do by statistical probability. We don't want it to probably stop. We want it to stop. And so in asking the guys that are doing the self-driving cars, what sorts of things do you try to build into this system? I've always come away with the feeling that the first thing they want to do is don't run into anything. And that's an important rule to try to observe. Now, the term artificial intelligence is often conflated with another phrase that was used back in the 60s, and that's general artificial intelligence. And I think it's very critical for you to appreciate that human beings have the ability, based on very little input, to formulate models of the world. And in fact, I think a great deal of what we do is based on a model of the world which we have built from our experiences. And we act primarily on the model until the model doesn't match the real world, and that's when we realize that we have to change the model. Model building is not easy, and I don't think there's much that can be shown in today's artificial intelligence and machine learning world that demonstrates machines building models and reasoning about them. So I think that's the most fundamental aspect of human capacity, is to build models and reason about them, including models of things that don't actually exist. That gets us to creativity and imagination. So I'll stop there and say that we are a long ways away from creating machines that can think like people, but we can create machines that can help people think better. And we'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Vint. Ian,
Sure.
did you have a slide that you'd like to show?
I'll let you click on that, Will.
Okay.
Here. I'll click on that in a sec, but first I just wanted to say I thought that was a fantastic description of machine learning and artificial intelligence and what the state of play is right now. So in neuroscience, there isn't a lot of machine learning that's currently used. I think in general, the power of machine learning is becoming evident to everybody, and it is allowing self-driving cars, and it does threaten to displace a lot of people from their jobs.
I hope that it's also apparent that these are fairly narrow. These capacities,
definitely.
these impressive capacities are narrow. Okay, keep going. Sorry for the interruption.
In machine learning, it's also clear. So I guess the main important point that I want to make is that current AI and machine learning is informed very, very little by an understanding of how the brain works.
Yes.
And that is because in neuroscience, there is no understanding of how the brain works. And
So there,
this isn't
right.
for lack of trying. There are tens of thousands of neuroscientists, many of them very, very smart, all working feverishly to examine and discover aspects of the brain. And they're making phenomenal discoveries all the time. And new technologies have emerged in neuroscience in the last 10 years that are allowing this to accelerate, perhaps in an exponential way, perhaps in a logistic way. But the big picture isn't there. So it's as if it's biology before Darwin, or physics before Newton, something like that. And everybody knows this, but you don't really talk about. Everybody in neuroscience knows this, but you don't. It's just a bummer to say it. So you might not catch that if you're just hearing about discoveries in the brain from the outside. And so now one might think, well, maybe it doesn't matter very much to AI that they don't have an understanding of how biological brains work, because Moore's law is allowing, and the massive availability. I don't believe this. And I'm glad
That's
I'm glad-
good
I'm
because
glad you don't,
because
I'm
I was
glad you
gonna-
don't either.
Right.
But so the counter argument would be, the advances in AI that have come, and let's call it in machine learning actually, really, have come basically because of the massive increases in computing power over the last, 20 years, the ongoing massive increases in computing power, and also the great availability of data because of the internet. Thank you for the internet.
You're welcome.
And so as a result, the ideas that people had in the 80s and in the 1990s have now allowed just the application, fairly straightforward application of those, in Google, at Google DeepMind, which is a unit in London, which has been making great gains. They're the ones who originated AlphaGo. And now AlphaGo Zero as of last year, which, so 2 years ago, well, let's put it so, 20 years ago, to back up, Garry Kasparov was beaten by Deep Blue. It was a sensation. It was a milestone. So this prerogative of human intellect, chess, was overthrown by, it was dominated by a machine. Okay.
1997, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, literally 20 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But then the game of Go, which was sort of superficially similar to chess, but much more complicated because it couldn't be solved by brute force essentially, as opposed to chess. That was felt to be sort of the holdout, let's say, for humanity. Okay, 2 years ago, Google DeepMind it succeeded in establishing a computer program, a deep learning network that beat the world champion in Go, Lee Sedol.
Lee Sedol, right.
Exactly. Okay, so that was another milestone. Go has now fallen to the machines. Okay, this year, Google DeepMind came up with that was AlphaGo. So this year they came up with something called AlphaGo Zero, which is a new architecture. It's again based on the same ideas, but this one was trained not with any human input at all, but just by starting with no knowledge of the game and just playing itself in a virtual space over and over and over.
Well, it had to know what legal rules.
Yeah, sure. But no, yes, it was told the rules of Go. It was allowed the rules, and then it just had to figure everything else out. And it beat the pants off of AlphaGo. So this is AlphaGo Zero, beat the pants 100 games to 0 off of AlphaGo. Okay, and now they've extended that to other games. You announced it, and the head of DeepMind announced this last week that they've now applied the exact same program to chess, and again with no knowledge other than the rules of chess, and beaten the best.
So Ian, let me just jump in here
Yeah, sure.
because you started by talking about the implications of machine learning and artificial intelligence for employment. And I wanted to bring you back there because that was a really interesting thread that you were going down.
So this is all by way of saying that it's increasing a lot. It's increasing exponentially. It will be very, very disruptive as in the last couple of years, everyone's now talking about the impact on people's employment, which is huge. And it just wasn't on people's agenda before, on people's radar. But so far, it has been driven not by any understanding of how the brain works, basically. Just from intuition, inspiration, but sort of a very basic understanding. Okay, I guess my main point is that at some point, neuroscientists, in partnership almost certainly with artificial intelligence theorists, researchers, whatever, will develop understanding of the organizing principles of the brain. It's a tremendously complicated system, but then so is the sort of struggle for existence. And Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace simultaneously just stumbled across, imagined, thought of, realized the sort of basic principles for how evolution works. And they were very, very simple principles. And they explain all of this complexity. Something like that may well happen in neuroscience. If it does, then the acceleration, the development of AI, I would imagine would be drastically accelerated.
I feel a strong need to interject at this point.
You go.
Because I think that it is not necessarily true that because you understand how the brain works, that you can replicate that in any way other than a brain, a biological brain. So I want to be careful about false equivalences here. This isn't to say that it's not possible. In fact, some of the people who were in the previous panel whose imagination has gone wild can imagine building a thing which behaves the same way as a human brain does, but on different principles. But I just want to be very careful not to leap to a conclusion about that. The understanding doesn't necessarily mean that we know how to replicate other than by the conventional means, biologically.
That's true. Yeah, and a counter argument to that sort of thinking would be flight, right? So we have tremendously.
Sorry, what was
flight?
Flight.
A sort of counter
Yes.
example would be that we have phenomenally powerful planes and helicopters and now drones, and they, by some criteria, can certainly, in terms of power, speed, everything, can totally outperform any bird or bat or insect. And so it doesn't matter that we don't understand really how a bird flies, or to the extent that we do, we don't care how a bird flies if all we want to do is make fast planes, right? So, so it's not necessarily true that it would directly translate. On the other hand, I feel like if there is some actual fundamental organizing principle, that would help, I would think.
Dava, you've done a lot of research on space and space exploration, and you're very clearly very interested in it personally. Tell us a little bit about what artificial intelligence and machine learning are doing in your field.
We do have a technological constraint, which is that I have one slide that has to be shown before.
You can show your slide.
Go ahead.
And then we'll get to flying and Mars.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
So what is it, the green?
It's already up. It looks
Yeah.
like.
Oh,
it's
yes.
up, it's up.
All right, so
It's
here we
great.
go.
It's a beautiful
This is
image.
that looks
Put this up the whole
very
time.
familiar.
Yeah.
Is that
If you
our
squint.
deep dream?
Yeah,
thing?
exactly.
Oh,
So
my.
this is sort of a
Classic, typical Googler.
precisely.
Makes you wonder.
Yeah, exactly. So can machines have imagination? Is imagination, creativity, is that something that no matter how powerful AI or computers get, they'll just never be able to replicate? I don't think so. And this sort of image, and there are many more like it, and you can make your own by going to the Deep Dream website at Google
Just hand it a photograph and let her rip.
and tell it what it's supposed to see.
Right.
In the image. And so basically this is the result of a neural network run backwards. So usually a common application for neural networks is image, and these are deep neural networks that Vint was talking about, is you feed it a bunch of images, that people posted on Facebook or whatever, and, well, probably not Facebook, at Google, but a bunch of images, and it's supposed to say whether there's a cat in the image.
Or a giraffe, or a bear, or
Precisely,
whatever it is.
exactly. And so, but if you give it an image and you tell it that there are animals in the image, even if there aren't, and then you let it kind of work backwards and adjust the image until it agrees with that conclusion that there are animals in the image, then you get these phenomenal sort of hallucinations that are completely coming from a machine based only on an image and the assertion that it has to agree that there are animals in that image, for example. So there you go. Machine imagination.
It's a recursive process, though.
Yeah.
That's very important.
Yeah.
And so basically what you do is you think you see, the software thinks it sees a bird or something like that, but it's not so clear. And so it feeds back on itself until it can see the bird better, and does that by refining the image over and over again.
It makes a nice
So
movie.
Vint, tell us what you think happened here, what kind of image it was given, and what it was told in such a way that we got this result. What's going on here?
Well, I tried to say that just a moment ago. If you have an image recognition system, it often is looking for, does this look like something? So that is to say, is it nearly like something? How far away is it from that particular image? And what happens is that you transform the existing image to get it closer to the thing that you're looking for. And so these are transformations that cause the various variations in the original picture are the seeds from which this image is essentially extracted. And it's extracted by adjusting the actual image to make it get closer and closer. It's exactly as you said, instead of the other way, which is look at this image and try to figure out of all the images you've ever seen, what's it closest to. Mm-hmm. This one is make this image get closer and closer to that.
Right, but to be more specific, did this come from a photo of person's face?
Yeah,
and
this
then
is a self-portrait of Vincent van Gogh.
Yeah, this is Vincent
And
van
actually,
Gogh.
if you squint at it, you can see
You can still
that
see
it's a
Van
self-portrait,
Gogh.
right?
Yeah.
And it's just been informed. The machine has been told that there are animals that it's looking
Well,
at.
particularly it looks like things
Birds
with eyes
and reptiles,
birds. Yeah,
exactly.
birds and reptiles.
Yeah, and so
So it's looking for them.
It's just making.
And it says,
yeah,
well, if I
exactly.
just adjust the image a little bit, I'll see that bird even more clearly.
Yeah.
It's the thing coming out of his ear. Right?
Yeah, right. And I guess my point is that this is so mental looking, right? It doesn't look, I mean, it just is so, it's just what brains do, in a sense, right? And it's sort of recognizable.
Demented ones, right? I mean, if you saw this and you said, I don't know if I want to meet the artist.
Right, precisely. Anyway, so can machines have imagination? I think this is a small, very limited example of, yes, I would say, of course, they can, and will continue to develop their imaginations very much in the future, perhaps the near future. Over to you, Dan.
So I wanted to give you a couple examples. First example is exploration in Mars. You know, do machines and people have imaginations? Been designing a suit for Mars for quite a while. It's very much inspired by biology. Again, when it comes to AR, linear thinking, we're going to go into a big discussion here in a minute. But I want to show you the tools that the future is already here. So you can take a look at my biosuit. When you get to Mars, we will become interplanetary. Hopefully, it's you guys. There's a few students left here. All the students, you're the Mars generation. I don't know, XZ. I don't like these, X, Y, Z. You guys are the Mars generation. I'm counting on you because we're just making it possible. But it's going to be the 2030s. We have these young folks get to Mars and return you back safely. And hope you're wearing something like that. But I wanted to show you how science is done today. Today, we have 40 scientists that work on our Mars Curiosity rover, and they don augmented reality goggles. So they put one of these on, and Ian's going to be my little tester here. You guys talk so long, my HoloLens went off. But we'll see. I can put it back on. I guess I have the clicker. So we have Curiosity on Mars. We have 7 assets on Mars today. NASA has 5, and Indian Space Agency has an observer, and the Europeans have an observer. So getting ready to find life in the universe. Talked to, you heard from Dr. Ellen Stofan today, worked together very closely. I think in the next decade, we'll probably find the evidence of life or past life. Okay, so how are we using augmented reality today?
That's good.
We sit at our desk, we don the HoloLens, and we have our avatars. We beam ourselves on Mars. It's incredibly
Come here
immersive.
and look at these rocks from this perspective. I think we should place an APXS here.
So this is one scientist saying, hey, there's the geology, there's the rocks.
Nice. I totally missed that
These
when I
are
was just
from
looking at the
images
images.
that Curiosity took last night in high definition. And we beam them down every morning.
Oh, wow. Look at this outcrop. You really don't get a feeling for the shape of it when you're just
But I'm
looking
an
at your
aerospace
computer.
engineer. I'm not the best geologist, so
How
I'm going
about
to
a
bring my
mass cam
scientist
right
friends
about
on board.
there?
So I'm going to beam up
Agreed.
their
We
avatars
could really
here.
use the higher resolution there.
Hey,
Okay, I think we're
because
ready for the
science is done
meeting.
in teaming.
Let's see what
I'm
Jane
an
and
aerospace
Samir think of
engineer.
this.
We do this in teams.
Hey, guys.
More people can always
Let's
think
review our
better
APXS
and our
target.
machines. So I look at human version 2.0, where I can't tell the difference between what's human and
get some
how
good
my
data here.
machines and AI are. So
We
that's
wanted a
Curiosity.
mass
That's
cam
the
of
real
this.
thing we have on Mars. But as scientists, we put on our HoloLens
Yeah,
every
looks good
8
to
o'clock
me.
every morning, and
Agreed.
we
Let's
have
move
this
forward with this.
interaction. It's science teaming, and guess what? We can improve and we can enhance the science that we can get done with our rover. And then, we have to zip back home to Earth because we live here on Earth. There's always humans in the loop. We can talk about Google's self-driving car if you want. I think they got it all wrong. I'm a student of Sheridan, so humans always in the loop somewhere. So that would be a fun thing to talk about.
David, just one really quick follow-up on that video. I mean, thinking back to when I was in school learning about space exploration, I never could have predicted that space exploration would mean sitting on Earth looking through an augmented reality lens at a high-definition image of a Mars rock. I mean, how did we... who had to come up with that idea, and why was that not something that, as a child, I could have predicted happening 20 years from then?
So I guess I'm probably here, and I probably became a rocket scientist against all odds. I'm an aerospace engineer, probably because of Apollo. That was transformative. I would argue it was transformative for humanity. It was a huge push in technology. It was a huge push for education. For me personally, young girl growing up in Montana, it was a huge push in, hey, anything's possible. We can go to other planets. We can go to moons. Fast forward, now, NASA's going to celebrate its 60th year. Fast forward, we're at Mars. We've been at Mars for 50 years with our rovers and our orbiters. The big step is humans. Let's bring humans with our machines. And now we're in the 2020s with this really cool technology saying, it's my job as an educator, professor at MIT, to say, I want to bring every girl and boy with me. How can I bring every girl and boy who wants to come with me? 4 lucky people are going to land on Mars. But all of humanity can come if we give them these tools. And it really is different than me looking at my laptop. That's how we were having our mission planners. They were looking at their laptops every night. The images come down, and we look at Curiosity. It goes really slow. It's a slow rover. The first human mission we get there, in the first week of the human mission, we'll cover more ground than 50 years of robots. That's okay. Our space robots aren't that great yet. But the point is, it's always humans. It's always machines. To me, it's looking for that synergy and bringing educationally, to your point, Brian, bringing all the kids, everyone, citizen science. We're at Jupiter today with the Juno mission. You can just hop on the NASA website and point the Juno camera, Juno, the goddess of Jupiter, and say, hey, I want to image the red spot. So huge push for citizen science, for bringing, all of humanity with us from Mars. I don't want to lose sight of the human element. Again, exploration is about our own planet. I love Mars. I'm trying to bring people to Mars for my whole career, but it's mostly to search for life. Are there other habitable planets? And most importantly, what about life here on Earth? Which I want to show you a little bit of data on that, because I think they're the rest of our slides and we break into discussion. But what's the purpose of deep learning to me? Machine learning. It's really about curating the data. So I have exabytes of data a day. I'll show you what some of that looks like. We have 20 Earth-observing satellites. And so space station just zoomed over. When you're in low Earth orbit, it only takes 90 minutes to circle the globe. So these are supercomputer simulations. I have space data from satellites. I fly airplanes for atmospheric data, and we have data on Earth. So I can tell you what you want to know about, sea level, temperature, and things like that. Now, how are we going to make spaceship Earth? We're all astronauts. If you ever wanted to be an astronaut, well, you are. We're flying around our solar system, around the sun. So let me show you just these kind of supercomputer simulations. This is temperature rise. Blue is 1 to 2 degrees below average. Yellow and orange are 1 to 2 degrees Celsius above the average. So you can see the years going by. You can raise your hand when you're born. That's it. We just surpassed 1 degree Celsius. Okay?
Wow, that's
just the scientific data.
Yeah.
That's where I use deep learning, visual communication. Here's another one, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is human-made. This is greenhouse gases. The fires right now going on in California, they're adding to this. What this simulation I'm showing you is just 1 year, 2014 to 2015. Actually, just last week, we went over 410 parts per million. We don't want to be in the 400s. We don't want to see yellow. We don't want to see orange. Look at the Northern Hemisphere. All of that yellow, all of that orange is over 400 parts per million. Now, this is something we can do something about. This is trapped greenhouse gas. I put it in a dimensional 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers. That's up to 20 kilometers is what you're seeing in this simulation. We can do something about this. We have a choice, but we have to change. I think it's urgent. It's going to take me 15 more years to get people to Mars. Only 10 more years to heal the planet. It's really very, very urgent. And I'll just show you one final simulation to kick off a lot of the discussion. It was on the bucket list. I got to go to the South Pole when I was with our National Science Foundation. On the top left, we're flying over Antarctica. It's, again, that's artistic, it's beautiful, but it's also scientific. But we're studying what's happening to the ice. Up on the top right, this is Greenland. Greenland and Antarctica on the bottom right hold 99% of the fresh water of the Earth trapped in ice, and it's melting. So we fly over it to try to take the scientific data and measurements. So on the top right, you'll see the data just from this year from Greenland and the Greenland glaciers melting. We just lost 287 gigatons of ice last year. That's 3 times the size of Texas. And this is a scientific visualization of that because we need to know the velocity vector. How is the ice melting? Is it calving off? And things like that. On the bottom, from last year, we lost 125 gigatons from Antarctica.
Right.
So that's the data.
So, talking a little bit about coming advances in computing technology, we talked a little bit about some of the limits of Moore's law, but also a little bit about quantum computing. Thinking a little bit further out now, what more can you do, Dava, in your line of work with that extra computing power? And to Ian, you mentioned that right now there's not much machine learning being used in neuroscience. Could you see that changing with increases in computing power?
Sure.
Yeah, so this is, these are supercomputer simulations. I wish I had this, and we're getting there. I mean, I wish I had this in my pocket. And then we do, kind of filter them down, because the thing is that we want to educate, the world. Here's the data, and then we want to be able to. The human's the trickiest part. How do we change behavior? What do we do with all that data? We curate all this data. We use all the best algorithms we can across the board. We're getting better and better. But again, these are high computational models, visually very compelling. But the next step, I would argue, is the really hard one. What do we know about humans? What do we know about human behavior? How do we know about changing human behavior? I think that's the hard part. And then pass it back over to the neuroscientist.
Actually, I wonder if I could try to answer your earlier question. You asked, how would I, as a kid, have been able to imagine the use of virtual reality to explore Mars? And the answer is, in order to have imagination, you have to know a few facts. You have to know things. And you have to know enough of them so that you can begin to put them together. And when you were growing up, we may have had video games that were getting better and better. We had special graphical processing units, new kinds of processing power, that allowed us to render triangles faster than we ever could before, producing much more interactive, high-resolution games. So you may actually have known enough implicitly to have figured this out, but maybe you just didn't put enough pieces together. But I want to emphasize how important knowledge is to imagination. If you know nothing, it's hard to imagine very much. And,
Ian?
Sure. Yeah, actually, I said there wasn't much neuroscience in machine learning, rather than the other way around.
Right.
So machine learning and neuroscience, I mean, undoubtedly it's being used in a lot of different ways, because it's now this just fantastic computing tool. There is a huge amount of data that's being generated in neuroscience, and so the Brain Initiative, started by the Obama administration, has actually recently funded a bunch of sort of large-scale efforts to collect data on lots and lots of different neurons in the brain. And there are a number of teams that have received those awards, and their jobs are to collect the transcriptomic information of what genes are expressed in a given neuron, its morphological information, what its shape is, and its connections, what other neurons in the brain it's connected to, and also what it does. And you can image the activity of a neuron in the brain of a living mouse and get lots and lots of information about what it does in response to, let's say, visual information. So that amounts to a ton of data that a person can't by themselves do anything with, right? So you need a lot of computation, and that could be somewhat simple computation of just sort of categorizing them, clustering them into different cell types and that sort of thing. But undoubtedly, advances in computing power and intelligent analysis, automated analysis, will be extremely helpful in helping to understand that, and therefore might drive the kinds of fundamental insights that neuroscience needs.
Well, I would make a small bet here that the machine learning that might be used to recognize different kinds of neuron cells and all these tools that help us categorize and so on is a form of abstraction. And one of the most powerful inducers for imagination is to abstract enough that you've got rid of all the unnecessary complexity. You've reduced things to a kind of basic core, and then you can begin to think about that because you have not become lost in the forest. And so these tools, these categorization tools, are things that may help us fire imagination by helping us simplify. Not too much. It's like Einstein said, things should be as simple as possible, but not overly simple.
So wanted to come back to a point that came up a little bit earlier about the difference between machine learning and general AI, and how much of the research and development that's been happening lately has been mainly in machine learning.
That's right.
And we're still somewhat far away from
it's a
general.
statistical type of learning. Right?
I guess one thing that is probably on a lot of people's minds is just how far off are we from general AI, and what'll it take to get there, and what happens once we get there.
So I think we're still quite a long ways away from this. For certain narrow domains, we can exhibit some fairly amazing things. I mean, we did something at Google once where we were looking at images of diabetic retinopathy, which is something that you can tell by looking at the retina. And so we had something like 87 specialists looking at the images, diagnosing what they could see and categorizing whether this showed the retinopathy or not. And then we trained a neural algorithm, and it was better than the 87 because it was essentially assimilating all of their capabilities. But that's an extremely narrow kind of example. That's a categorization question. Let me give you an example of how I became convinced that our brains are fundamentally pattern matchers, and that we use the pattern matching structure of the brain in order to build models of the real world around us. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. It's 1976. I'm on this, 75. I'm on the Stanford campus driving along Campus Drive. Why is it 3 a.m.? It's because I was doing tests of the internet protocols with my colleagues in London, and they were 8 hours, distant. And so we had to start at noon their time, but that was like 3 o'clock or 11 o'clock their time. So anyway, I'm done with the tests. I'm driving home. I drive through a stop sign which was not there the day before. I got about 50 yards past the stop sign, and then I stopped saying, I just drove through a stop sign. And what that taught me is that I was navigating based on a model in my head of what the real world was. And that was easier to compute with than taking all the input and trying to figure out where I was going. But the input was being compared with the model. And it took a little while, but suddenly the input says, the real world doesn't match the model. You have to fix it. So I am persuaded, even by that one simple example, that we are a model building species that uses models to reason. And we are, so far as I know, pretty far away from being able to emulate that capability in any programming system that I'm aware of.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up that anecdote, because as I understand it, much of our self-driving car technology is similar in that the car is constantly taking in samples of the world around it and matching against a model of what it is already.
It's a multi-dimensional input from lasers and video, and I don't know if we're using radar. Maybe we're using radar too. But there are a whole bunch of things, plus high-resolution maps, plus GPS, plus rule sets. The fixed rules that say don't run into anything, don't go through the stoplight. All that has to be brought together. And the magic of all this is that it's possible to bring all that together.
So I want to jump in on this.
There is a boatload of computing going on in the trunk of the car.
Yeah.
So,
Dava?
Yeah, self-driving cars. Google said it's the wrong problem. What? So, self-driving cars.
What's the wrong problem?
Having a self-driving car. Again,
Okay.
you're taking out the supercomputer human that you have involved in the system. I think that's really simplifying the problem. So it's interesting, and let's push our autonomy as far as we can go. Again, I need it to Mars. We really need fully autonomous systems when we're there because of the time delay you heard about this morning, things like that. But let's take a fully autonomous car. Well, we don't have the infrastructure for it. So fully autonomous cars, they're good for Disneyland. They might be good on college campuses. Other complex, because they're 2D in our cities and our bridges and everything else. So you're thinking about putting, this fully autonomous cars. The people, I would be great if I'm in my car, because I commute now, again, back and forth, and I need to learn Spanish. And that's great. So just drive me where I want to go. I love that part of it. But there's some fallacies. One of the fallacies is, they'll be safer because we have a lot of accidents with cars, right? Well, that's because people are under the influence or things like that. There's not a shred of scientific evidence that the self-driving car will be safer than the human, first of all, because the human brain and the human reaction time, and the human is so good when it comes to kind of split decisions, putting everything in and, making these observations. So why not try for a, half-half? There's something else, that there's manual control is a 1. We go to a 10-point scale that would be fully autonomous. Let's shoot design-wise. Let's talk about the design of these very complex systems. Shoot for a 5. So when the person's there and wants to drive, great. You're going to make better decisions if you put all your attention to it. And when you want to be in the pod, it's just like your iPad. You want to be in the pod. Let the pod drive. And what we're really missing with autonomous vehicles and self-driving cars in particular is the third dimension. As soon as we get autonomous self-flying vehicles, then we can open up the space because we don't have to redo all of our 2D infrastructure. As soon as we have flying cars and commuting, if you're an urban person, then that would be the thing to strive for. That's why I say, kind of self-driving cars in itself is kind of the wrong goal.
Vint, do you want to respond to that?
I have negative reaction to what you just said. So
I'm sure you do.
I am sorry, but we have 4 million miles of experience with these self-driving cars. We don't have accidents in those cars. Most of them have been somebody rear-ending us, except there was the one where the car came up to an obstruction on the lane, and there was a bus next to it, and it was trying to get around the obstruction, and we had this horrendous 3-mile-per-hour crash. So the fact of the matter is that these processes don't have the weaknesses that human beings have. They don't have the macho, I'm going through the red light anyway. They don't have the, I'm going to speed up and get around you. All they want to do is get you there from point A to point B safely. So we actually have enough experience that I anticipate we will be running self-driving car services not very long from now. And there are others who are making similar claims.
Yeah, and there's good places for them. But again, if you do the third dimension or, have altitude.
Actually, I am
that's
terrified.
Perfect.
I am absolutely terrified of any idea of self-flying anything because there's going to be plenty of opportunity for everything running into everything else. There's more opportunity to run into each other in the air, I think, than there is on the ground. Now, you and I will have a nice debate after this thing is over about that.
So let me just jump in here real quick and ask a little bit about, because I'm really fascinated about sort of the line between all these different branches of AI research. And when we get to the point where, speak to a lot of experts who talk to me about machine learning algorithms as essentially black boxes, right? So, what often happens is engineers will look at the output of a particular algorithm to try and understand what the machine was doing. And so for Ian, I kind of wanted to ask, the more we learn about the human brain, does that tell us anything, or does that help us understand the machines that we're building in machine learning? Is there any connection there?
Well, if you look, for example, in the middle layers of a deep network that's looking at visual inputs, you'll find people have found sort of so-called receptive fields, meaning the sort of pattern of inputs that they're most responsive to, that look, by some criteria, similar to the receptive fields of neurons in the cerebral cortex. I think everybody recognizes, though, that the networks, the neural networks, so-called neural networks, deep networks, whatever, that are being used with the backpropagation algorithm developed in the 80s, is being used to train these deep neural networks, lots and lots of layers and tons of data, all in a feed-forward way, meaning it's processed in a series of stages called layers, and
Right, propagating.
exactly, and it propagates in a forward direction. You start with an image, and you process it one step, and you continue through 20, 30 steps, whatever. That's extremely different than how our brains are put together. And everybody knows this, but it's not that information has not been used, I think, in any major way.
There is beginning to be some exploration of feedback within the layers, and that's now becoming more physically technically possible. But for the most part, you're right. It's sort of a downward propagation thing. His question, of course, is: do we understand what the hell's going on in there? There are places called restriction points, which are kind of like your, what did you call them again?
Receptive fields.
Receptor fields that look like they are the place where the thing figured out this was a dog instead of a cat. But that's so simple compared to what we are probably processing in our heads that it's not clear how illuminating that is.
Another thing we haven't talked about for, if we say artificial intelligence is kind of the big umbrella, and then we're talking about deep learning, machine learning, a couple of things we haven't talked about are actually natural language and cognitive. And so these algorithms, when we get in, you might notice, Siri's getting better these days, and Alexa's getting better, and things like that. And so, again, why are they getting better? Well, we think they're better because we don't have to adapt anymore. They're becoming more human-like. They're getting better because, again, when we start using natural language algorithms, things. So again, if AI is this big thing, we have all these different algorithms, if you will. It's a lot of computer science. And again, what it's missing is, perhaps the really multidisciplinary approach. But I just wanted to mention those two in particular, natural language and cognition, because once you build those in, people start, usability tests, people start liking them better, say, oh, okay, they relate more to them, and it seems more like a natural conversation.
So there is an interesting role that machine learning has played in natural language processing. For a while, there was a statistic. Well, we started once by pouring a Russian English dictionary into the computer, thinking that's all it would take. And so we typed in "out of sight, out of mind," translated it into Russian and translated it back, and it came back "invisible idiot." And at that point, we realized maybe we had some work to do. So the next phase was to take large numbers of documents that were purported to be the same document in different languages, and then use statistical methods to say this phrase looks like it must be that phrase. We got fairly far along and then sort of flattened out. Then we started using neural network machine learning mechanisms, and we got substantially better, which is manifested by what you're describing as better machine language recognition and also translation. So we've reached the point now where it's possible to do real-time translation.
That'd be great.
Which is pretty amazing. You watch somebody speaking Spanish and the other person is speaking English, and they're actually getting reasonable communication back and forth.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about machine learning. Let's turn now to general AI. Imagine what the world will look like then and what it will mean for our human experience.
So everybody worries about the possibility that something which is capable of doing the kind of reasoning and model building that humans do could also exhibit information-seeking behavior, motivation, desire. I mean, I don't mean sexual desire, but desire for more knowledge. And when you begin to extrapolate that, you begin to wonder just how far would such a general purpose intelligence evolve, and how would it evolve? Would it evolve on its own? One of the more scary scenarios that is presented to make people scared about AI is that if a machine can learn how to do X better than a human, then for every value of X that it can learn to be better than a human, eventually all machines will be better than all humans. And then we will be superfluous. And so that's obviously one, sort of that could be a science fiction theme. I'm still not yet prepared to buy that particular argument. Maybe I'm naive, but so far most of the really powerful tools that have evolved have been literally things that I work with and use. And I'm feeling very comfortable with that. Every time I get an email from somebody in Russian, which I don't speak, it's very helpful that something translated it, even if you know that it might not be precisely correct. So I'm seeing more positive side to this than I am negative, but I don't know where you guys are on this.
I see certainly both. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'm not the doom and gloom, and AI has taken over the world. Again, I've seen the advance, great, of robotics and the machines. I actually look more toward, again, the synergy. I think we'll hit, some of these milestones. I think educationally, we've taught in disciplines. And there's a really nice, education panel before us to think about some of these things. So you think about AI as still that's the discipline of computer scientists, And so Ian said, well, hey, the neuroscience, the brain scientists, let us in, let us in the game. We want to, well, guess what? I come, kind of more from aerospace engineering. We're more the physical engineers, the mechanical engineers, aerospace engineers. We're talking very technical up here about algorithms. we need the artists, we need the designers, which has been brought up, because, again, I bring everyone on board. And so, again, AI is, I don't think it's going to take over. Humans are really complex. It's not just us individually. Our systems are really, really complex. Our organizations are really complex, and that's the beauty of it, and that's hard. So I, again, look at it as very complementary, that we all work together, again, as humans and machines. I don't really differentiate too much. But I would say, again, back with my educator hat on, we have to think about the consequences. I hope folks are taking ethics and so again, across the disciplines, we have to learn from each other. We might not speak the same language, but I mean really disciplinary language. So I do think that there's educational opportunities in terms of how to shape and design these systems. But again, I'm not really worried about how anytime soon. I'm much more worried about humans' effect on the Earth and the planet and things like that.
So in a minute, I'm going to start taking some questions from the audience. So be thinking if you have questions already, and I think there is a mic roving around. But before I get to that point, just wanted to follow up on that a little bit. Science fiction obviously is replete with examples of artificial intelligence run amok. And I wonder,
One is not qualified to run amok. You remember that line from The Bicentennial Man, Robin Williams? Somebody said,
Great
what if he
movie.
runs amok? And he says, one is not qualified to run amok.
So
Sorry.
I'm kind of curious, what you think the role of science fiction has been in shaping the way that we think about general AI, and whether it's been, on the whole, helpful for helping us imagine a better future, or possibilities or features that general AI could be applied to, or conversely, has it been a hindrance in some ways, preventing us from grasping the realities of what general AI could mean, in a concrete and rational way?
Well,
First,
go ahead.
I think science fiction is critical. I think it's really, really important to imagine the extreme cases of what could happen so that we can plan for those possibilities. I want to just touch on what you just said about neuroscience is not being kept out of AI. AI is actually hungry for more inspiration and ideas. And actually, Demis Hassabis, the head of Google DeepMind, has been publicly stating that AI deep learning needs more input from neuroscience and inspiration. Jan LeCun, head of Facebook's neural networks division, is saying exactly the same thing. Jeff Hinton.
But I'd say it's a realized shortcoming. I mean, it didn't
Yeah,
start that way.
exactly.
It was, some people, the computer science at the table.
Yeah.
Now it's a shortcoming in realizing, hey, we got to make it much more multidisciplinary.
Yeah, exactly. And conversely, neuroscientists are hungry for theories that they can test. And so many theories which were originally inspired by neuroscience, but then adopted by, used to make reinforcement learning algorithms, and that are now used in the deep neural nets, are being used as theories to test in neuroscience. Yeah. But so to your question, do we need to examine the extreme cases? Yeah, we do, and that is science fiction, really, right? It's like imaginative people need to tell us what they think are possibilities, so that we can do something about those doomsday scenarios that are so entertaining.
Vint, do you have anything to add? Yeah.
Well, let me give you something to really worry about. Okay, I worry about boxes full of software that run autonomously. Sometimes you hear Internet of Things as a term to describe that. It's the autonomous software part that I worry about. It has nothing to do with AI. It has to do with just a simple piece of software that takes input in, makes a decision, and then does something that has an impact on the real world. And with bazillions of those boxes running around with bugs in them, because we haven't in 80 years figured out how to write software that doesn't have bugs. So there's a whole slew of concerns and issues I have that have nothing to do with AI. It just has to do with software run amok. So that's one point. Asimov, which has to be recognized as one of the guys that looked at the problem on robotics, had those 3 laws. I know there's a 4th one. It's a 0th one that got sorted out in a few novels later. But the idea there was what conditions would have to obtain in order to feel comfortable having these generally intelligent devices around. So that particular piece of science fiction is helpful because it speaks to you about what conditions you would want to have in place before you let these kinds of things loose in the world. That's all about safety, for one thing. But when the other properties that I worry about are security and privacy and reliability, and among others. Because you don't want things running around you're depending on that are not reliable. The same argument would be made for the self-driving cars. So I think that science fiction can help us focus on what it is that we should be attempting to accomplish if, in fact, we want to gain benefit from some of these technologies that are still evolving.
David, do you have anything you want to?
Well, just for science fiction, you know, I mean, I love, that's the imagination. That's, again, painting a picture that, and how they got, Jules Verne is my favorite. I go back, old school, you know, way, way, way back to Jules Verne. But how he got everything right. And I go faster to Einstein. Okay, Einstein didn't write us, but how did he get so much right? I mean, to me, they're the visionaries. To me, it's what I'm looking for in Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke. They're the visionaries that really are thinking 100 years out. And it's amazing, you know, especially when they get a whole bunch of it right. That's pretty amazing. So to me, it's the visioning and, you know, the future state and the dreaming and kind of making that, you know, science fiction into reality and gives us good challenges. But it's pretty amazing what humans can do too with our minds and creation.
Totally. Yeah.
Imagination. Yeah.
Let's take some questions from the audience.
Do we have a roving?
Yep. Let's bring the mic over here in the middle.
All right, I'll try and get over there.
This is where we need a little drone with a microphone.
That's right.
On it. Can zip over.
Where's the question?
Yes, it's a hand right there.
What do you feel is the future of AI in worldwide communication or in music?
That's
The
interesting.
world of communication.
And music.
Communication
Music.
and music.
Yeah.
So, well, we know one thing. You know, this thing that we showed you from the Deep Dream, that, you know, bizarre-looking thing that used to be just an image of Van Gogh, is an example of a feedback mechanism. But there are some other interesting ones, like a system, a neural network, which looks at an image and by a particular artist or a particular genre, and then maps that onto some other photograph that you might have. So you can make something look kind of Chinese, little pagodas start to pop up. The same thing is true in music. It is possible to recognize certain kinds of style. Now, I'm not going to argue that we know how to write down, this is the Bach style and this is the Wagner style, but you can use neural networks to recognize music by particular composers. And it is possible to then impose that style on, for example, a simple melodic line. Now we get into this incredible question of, is that creative or not? And I don't quite know how to answer the question, although if I enjoy the piece of music, even if it was produced by an algorithm, then I can't reject it just because of that. I'm responding to it because I like it. So I think the answer is we may have an interesting space of creativity triggered by machine learning algorithms that allow us to explore more quickly a space of musical production that we might otherwise be able to do manually.
Yeah, I think it's a healthy tension. Are you a musician yourself? Yeah. So I think it's a really healthy tension because we do have musicians and artists out there doing music, but via algorithms today. And at first I heard of it, I was like, oh, I want to like it. I want the real human creation and things like that. But I think it's really interesting tension now that I've thought about it more. And one thing in terms of research that we think about specific to this point of musician, say you're really good at the violin, right? How did you get really good at that? You put hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of hours into practice, like being an Olympic athlete, like being a professional musician. So we think about it and say, boy, wouldn't that be great? I'm probably never going to be a professional musician, but I sure would like to be proficient at the violin. What is that about learning And can we use, some really smart systems, let's just call them, that I go from a novice to being much more proficient. Can I learn those tricks? Can I learn, again, it's physical motion, but there's a lot of thinking. And so thinking about, AI, just if we call it generally like that, how does it make me go from kind of more of a novice to a really advanced person? That's an interesting research question we have.
I mean, what this conversation I find really fascinating, it speaks to this kind of almost innate human question that we have about, can machines dream? Can machines imagine? Can machines be artists? Can machines be all of, take on all of these qualities that we inherently think of as being fundamentally human? And part of me wonders what that says about the relationship between humans and machines, and how that relationship is going to evolve. Is there going to be, at some point, a reckoning that needs to happen among humans about how we think of machines as being, right now we think of them as being tools, as being somewhat lesser than we are. But how's that thinking going to have to change in the future? Or maybe it doesn't.
So, if I draw a kind of a crude sketch and I ask the machine to straighten it up for me, does that mean the machine has an imagination? I mean, I don't think so. I think that sounds like a fairly mechanical process. But then when you get more complex tools that let you take things and get the machine to automatically do like the CAD systems do, you're kind of on this funny edge of, is it imagining anything? And I think the answer is, at the moment, probably not. That it's mostly taking what you want it to do and is trying to mechanize that. And it's just an efficiency mechanism more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As we shift to,
Yeah, Walda
sorry,
had a
we've got a question from Walda here.
Walda needs a microphone.
Yeah, thank you. This is fascinating. I'm wondering if, I know each of you, just met Brian, but I know each of you, and I know you're also humanists at heart. So if we can shift then back to the human and imagine that you are being asked to redesign a school in a rural area,
Mm-hmm.
to prepare the young people in that school whose parents may be doing menial or blue collar or other work that may be
Mm-hmm.
better done by a well-trained, what qualities would you encourage them to promote so that they could look to the future of having both a sense of value and an economic well-being?
So I have a simple syllogism here. The normal paradigm that we've had for years for education was go to school, go to work, retire. Paradigm is broken. We are going to live longer. Kids that are born today will live to 100 or more. They will have working lives of 80 years. There's no question in my mind that they're going to have to go to school, go to work, go to school, go to work, go to school, go to work, so to speak. They have to learn. This is the point that got made beautifully in earlier discussions. Kids have to learn how to learn because they won't survive in the working world if they can't learn. So that's a message that their parents have to get, regardless of what their parents do. Now, some jobs are absolutely going to disappear because we will find ways of mechanizing them. It's happened before, it'll happen again. New jobs get created as a result. The problem is the people whose jobs were the ones that got mechanized may not be capable of doing the new jobs that are needed unless they learn. And now we're back to the most important thing that we can do for children. Teach them to learn, teach them to love to learn, and teach them to think critically about what they see and hear. And if they can learn those 3 lessons and apply them, they'll be better able to survive in this high longevity world than they would otherwise.
Dava, do you have any thoughts on that?
I like those 3, and I would say I would also teach them how to play. That was made in the previous point too. And every young person I know is infinitely creative. And then they come through our school system, and we kind of beat it out of them. They become problem solvers. So I want them to stay in that, and I want all adults too to, it's curiosity. Be very curious, and always ask why, and play, and and figure that out. And so, but we do have to I think, change education back to the jobs, and the future of jobs is a real issue. And 5 million people lost manufacturing jobs. Not just in the last 8 years, no, in the last 15 years. So we have 17 million manufacturing jobs in the US. So we just lost a third of our manufacturing jobs. People are angry. People are mad. What does that mean? I mean, it's pretty scary. You painted the picture of the rural school system. So again, I want to have all those kids at MIT. We have our courses. Of course, we're not a big place. We're small school, really, 10,000 people, right? Over 4,000 undergraduates. So we opened up all of our courses, open courseware. Because we said knowledge should be free. Knowledge should be free. We want the knowledge to go out to the world, right? So that's what I think about for the rural school building. If it's a red brick building with maybe just a few teachers, let's equip them. Let's give them information and knowledge. You need those special teachers, I think, because the hand-on tutoring. It's more like coaching and tutoring and individual. They talked earlier about individual education. I hope that we can look at all the kids learning and kind of individualize how they're doing, rather than the kind of just the textbook. So I'm optimistic, and to me it has that I can paint a nice optimistic future, and we have to create the jobs, and I think we will, but I think we have to be more intentional about that. We can create more jobs for folks. They are different jobs given the technology and what we're thinking about it, but and I think we have to take care of people as well and understand why people are angry and dissatisfied and have been left behind. And we have to take a look at the economic split in this country and address it. And I think talk about it and then always walk in someone else's shoes to say, let's have the dialogue, let's come together. But really try to have that discussion, and hopefully that will further education as well.
Sure. I was going to say, so it's more, I would think, a question of not beating the sense of play and love of learning out of children, rather than trying to inculcate them with it, because they start out with it. Mm-hmm. So and making sure that the school has a really good internet connection, right? I would think that would be sort of paramount, right? I mean, there's
Yes.
open courseware, there's Khan Academy, there's all of this information online, and textbooks are good, but they're still good because they assemble a body of information in one place and in a well thought out way, but they're, I would say, increasingly irrelevant. So just making sure that the kids have the ability to take off and use all the information and resources that are out there is very important. In rural Africa, they are now running an experiment with regard to the issue of economic displacement, which is in the short term and the medium term, i.e. as long as humans are still in control and before the robots become so advanced that they just far outclass us in every domain, and we just have to sort of be their pets or something. But but up until that point, it's a question of income inequality and economic displacement. That the near-term problem with AI is not that we'll have killer robots that will annihilate us, but that they'll just be better than us. And so that means that if you have a robotic neuroscientist that is way better than a human and is much cheaper, then there will be I'll lose my job, right? Neuroscience is actually probably one of the careers which is currently a good bet, unlike, for example, a radiologist or something where your job does involve interpreting images that in a way that can be done by a machine.
So I think let's put a pin in that for now. I'd love to come back to it, but before we do, I just want to see if there are other questions. Let's go to Mike.
All right, Mike.
Mike Nelson. We hear a lot about the robot overlords, as if somehow the robots are going to take over from the top. I've heard a much more interesting scenario, which is more the robot underground. And the best analogy is what happened when the British showed up in India in around the year 1600. They told the Indians, we'll take care of your defense needs and we'll push the Dutch out of the country. And after they did that, they said, oh, we'll take care of your policing needs because we're really good at policing. Oh, and we'll do foreign trade, and we'll do your sewer system, and we'll do your water. And pretty soon the Indians realized they were totally dependent on the British for everything, and they'd become a British colony. So my concern is that we're going to have these robots that do everything for us, from help us drive, to do our dishes, to think for us, and we'll just get fat and happy and useless.
So this is the WALL-E model.
This is the WALL-E model.
Okay.
So why am I wrong?
About
That's right. That's Wall-E. That's the ending of Wall-E. That's right. Yeah.
yeah. So what to do about that? How to prevent that?
How likely is it?
Yeah. So my feeling is eventually not with the ideas that we have now, but with ideas that I think are inevitably going to be discovered, because we have in each of our skulls the proof that one can make a device which is capable of thought and control of a robot-like body, which is capable of amazing physical feats and whatnot. Eventually, it will come to pass that machines will exceed our capabilities in essentially every way, and at that point, we will be superfluous. And whether that means that at that point if we distribute that massive increase in wealth and economic productivity, then we do have a potential WALL-E scenario where humans are just looked after cradle to grave and don't have anything to worry about and can be lazy sacks of flab if they want to, right? But I do happen to feel that humans are always going to be competing with each other to some extent, right? Showing off, it's not just to survive that we do what we do, and that we're driven to creative efforts. It's also to impress the human next to us, for example.
So Vint, I get the sense that you're of a different opinion.
Of course, it's an attractive model to put up for debate, Mike. But I'd like to point out to you that 8 or 9, maybe 10,000 years ago, the notion of moving from hunter-gatherer to agriculture created a very dramatic effect, which is not unlike the one that we're talking about now. It allowed a smaller number of people to feed a larger number, which allowed people some freedom to go and do new things, like invent, bows and arrows and other kinds of things. So, and even art and wall painting. So I think that we're just seeing a continuation of that kind of thing. The world that you are citing is found in Robots of Dawn, by Asimov in the Robot series, where he brings everything together from foundation to the robots. And again, they largely remain subservient to the human beings. There was something like 20,000 robots per human being on that planet. So that's one scenario you could look at. I am not willing to concede yet that human imagination and human ability to understand will necessarily be exceeded by robots. They may be able to do things that we understand well, better than we can, but you have to start with this deep understanding. And I think we will still have that in our favor.
Yeah, I think you have a long way to go before we get to that WALL-E takeover. Consciousness, imagination, adaptability, flexibility. We can go on and on about the human, as well as let's just talk about robots for a minute. I'm talking about AI and code robots. How many degrees of freedom do I have right here that I just wiggled? Hundreds. I got a robot. I'm a roboticist. I'm a robot with a human-like robot with 7 degrees of freedom, 12 degrees of freedom. Woohoo! So again, when we talk about just the robots and things like that, as a designer and complexity. And again, I don't pit human versus robots. We're all working together. We're embedding robotics and smart chips in our beings today. That's great. Bionic people, it's great, especially when you can get rid of disability. Things like that. So I'm hopeful that there's really kind of more of a synergy and happy medium, and we kind of come together in terms of the machine capability, if you will.
So we've got time for just a couple more questions. How about right here in the middle?
Couple back there.
I want to talk a little bit about self-driving cars, and you mentioned something about 4 million miles. Most driving situations for all of us, fortunately, are without accident. What about reaction time from that perspective? Anything you can say at this point? Is the stump, the AI, what is it that it can't see? The hole that opens up in front, the pothole, or the tire that comes towards the car, or the child that runs out into the street? What are the things that are the challenge at this point that are outside of the ordinary?
In fact, we see several blocks ahead. We have the capability to, because we're using information, radar, infrared, lasers, and so on, we can actually see farther than human beings can. We can react faster than human beings can, or those cars can. What's very interesting is the role of simulation in our testing of the cars. We can recreate the inputs that the cars get because we can record what they get. And we can play those back. We can play them back at scale. And so whenever a new piece of software is released for a self-driving car, it's run through the gamut of experiences that we've already recorded and have used to verify that the car still responds correctly, including cases where the child runs out, to catch a ball. Or we have accumulated an enormous amount of input data by driving the cars around and having them experience what happens on the roads, including people who dash out in front of the cars, the bicycle rider that fell over. We have 91 acre space. It used to be an Air Force base. And on it, we put artificial environments and enact various kinds of unexpected things, like there's a truck being loaded at the side of the road, and somebody deliberately spills boxes across the road. The car has to recognize that and stop. And not only do we create those situations to test the algorithms, but we can then recreate them and replay them as the new algorithms come along to try to improve the behavior of the car so we don't have a regression somewhere. So to be frank, the cars learn better than human beings do, and in my opinion. The ideal situation is to have no human drivers driving the cars at all, because they have bizarre motivations, whereas the self-driving cars simply want to get you there safely. So maybe someday it will be the case that humans will only be allowed to drive in restricted areas where they're free to damage themselves, and the rest of the roads are
or vice versa, right? That's why I say Disneyland, they're great, but it is really the mix of the autonomy and the humans, and the unrational behavior. That's really a really complex system.
That's why we spend so much time testing these things.
Exactly, training them, testing them, and you're developing your algorithms.
I will say that right now it is hard for humans to do worse. Right, like the federal government has statistics showing that 95% of all car accidents in America occur due to human error. And so, to the extent that you can reduce that even by 1 or 2%, that's already a massive improvement.
This is the better is the enemy of the good. If the cars are safer than humans, we don't have to be perfect. We just have to be safer than humans.
Right. Let's take one more question over here. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. This is actually, Vint, you're a great straight man for what I was going to ask. So if you try to slice and dice AI, there's a piece of it which is very time critical and where the consequences are rather serious, like being behind the wheel of a car. And there also, for a great many of those, the success criteria is a lot fuzzier. In a game of Go, it's a very one-dimensional kind of thing, in a sense that you can very easily determine, what's a good outcome, what's a bad outcome. One of the ways I think people do very well in these kind of environments is collaboration. And so you kind of define a collaborative space where the inventor or the company of the car is essentially managing the collaboration. but do you see a scenario where there's actually active collaboration,
Yes.
where some car out there says, hey, I just encountered the
Yes.
craziest damn thing, and here's what you need to do?
Absolutely. There's a lot of work going on in vehicle-to-vehicle communication protocols for that. And the ideal situation is that the car ahead of you is planning to change lanes, and it broadcasts that fact to the cars that are in the neighborhood, and the rest of the cars take advantage of that. We do that with humans now, theoretically, because you're supposed to use your turn signal to tell people what you're doing. It's amazing how many people don't bother. But the programmed cars have no reason not to do that. And so they might actually be better at it. And the fact that they could communicate with each other and adapt makes it even more appealing, in my view.
All right, let's take one final question from this side.
I'm Sam. I think you all referred to, at least tangentially, the idea that our behavior as humans comes out of running through a bunch of different models that we've collected as through experience. Certainly that's probably the case. Well, that is the case for AI programs. So as a human capacity, bring it back to imagination and creativity, and the idea that that would be fueled by our past experience. What are the consequences or implications of creativity in the future as we move more and more into these digital worlds and live with these technological artifacts that we've created are now informing our experience?
Great question.
I wish I had more intuition than I do. I can tell you that our technologies tend to outrace our understanding of social implications of the technology. Sherry Turkle at MIT has a book out some time back called Alone Together, and she describes what happens with kids that are texting with each other. We've created an artificial environment with properties that are different from face-to-face communication. So what the kids have learned is it's okay not to respond to a text. It's forgiven because maybe the other person is distracted or busy. But if you get them in a face-to-face situation and they don't know what to do next, they can't not do anything because it's this, awkward pause. Phone call, same problem. So, and you can't just hang up because that's obvious. And so these kids are actually not learning how to interact socially. That's a teeny little example of for me, a big surprise that particular technology had that property to it. I'm afraid that as we dive deeper and deeper into the virtual environments that we're creating, we will discover these properties that we didn't anticipate. And then it will be a question of what to do about it and how to cope. And I don't have, a pill to take that solves that problem.
Ian,
Mr.
any thoughts?
Neuroscientist, do you have
Any
nostrums
not a
for us?
neuroscientist specific perspective, but it seems pretty clear that if all the rote stuff is automated, right? You don't need to memorize U.S. history anymore. I mean, it's good to understand the basic principles of all these things and examples of where things can go wrong and all that stuff, but you certainly don't need to memorize much anymore, right? So, all of those things become less important. What becomes what's left, or what remains important and is getting even more important? Creativity and thinking of new ideas. And sort of coincidentally and simultaneously, it's now easier and easier to be creative in the sense that you could think of some little device and now you can just make it or get it made actually quite easily, whereas previously would have required, a plastics factory and molding and prototyping and many thousands of dollars. Now you can just print it on a 3D printer and there you have it. There's your
prototype or
exactly,
something.
right? Whatever it is, some little robotic critter that you want to to sell on the internet or
maybe
on
just
Kickstarter.
use. Maybe it's a spare
Exactly,
part that
sure,
you can't
exactly,
buy
sure,
anymore.
Exactly, make a replacement pair of glasses or something, right? So it's more important than ever and easier than ever.
The only thing to add is I actually love that example because we're talking about the digital world mostly and thinking and worried again about the kids living in the machine in the box and not and losing skills losing some skills, but I like the 3D printer example too, because that brings the digital world, but plus the physical world. Let's still the 3D, you know, let's make something, you know, let's see it. And so to me, it's changing for sure. Education needs to change, and we're changing. You know, we're at a disruptive place, but again, we can be intentional about it, and kind of, if the more intentional we are about it, I think, you know, we can help design those experiences and what we want them to be, at least.
Don't you think that the maker movement is a good example of taking advantage of
Yep.
new technology and getting kids involved? I mean,
Yeah,
and
you know.
allowing them to exercise creativity in a way they couldn't have before.
Yeah,
'Cause it was-
skills, you know, as an engineering professor, I mean, that's what we worried about that. And, you know, no one has drafting anymore in skills. When you can ask the folks here, if you live on an iPad your whole life, there's there's a new study out. There's fundamental skills that you'd like elementary kids to have that they actually no longer have. And it's scale, and it's taking a measurement, and it's rulers, and those things were just kind of taken for granted. And now we understand that students are losing those. So again, I think it's a happy mix. So take, you know, the digital and 3D printing for the creativity, the imagination, but again, still skill development, just back to let's help people learn how to learn, and that's hard, you know. So that takes a long time and a lot of experience. So we don't want to lose some of those, you know, I guess, skills and really helping folks learn how to learn.
Well, that's very on theme, and it seems like a really great place to stop for today. Thank you so much for everyone to coming. Thank you to our awesome panelists. Appreciate your participation. And I guess we'll be moving on to the next segment.
I'll take you to Mars.
So I want to thank you all, and if you want to go sit in the audience, you certainly can, or you can stay where you are.